department here. And I'd like to welcome you, the members of the Eritrean Diaspora Network, Teamster members and staff, friends and panelists to tonight's events, which is Justice for All, Echoes of the Global Movement for Black Lives. We hope that tonight's discussion provides you not only with a better understanding of the several movements and campaigns against violence, the violent and unfair treatment of Black people, be they born here or abroad, but also provides you with the knowledge and tools to effect positive change in your communities, to stop the harassment, discrimination, and the killing of our young Black men and our Black people. Before we start tonight's discussion, I'd like to thank some of our sponsors. First with the Teamster sponsors, the IBT Legal Department, led by General Counsel Brad Raymond and Director Gary Whitland, who's in the back. Thank you, Gary. And also Flora Grad, who assisted with helping you sign in. Flora, wherever you are, thank you. Also, one of our co-sponsors is IBT Strategic Research and Campaigns Department under the direction of the Director Ian Cole. And thank you, Alyssa, for assisting with the sign-in. Alyssa Layton, who's also in that department. And we'd also like to thank Gail Whiteco and his team for setting up, and Chef Steven Shapiro and his assistants for extending their very long workday to provide us with refreshments for this event. And finally, I'd like to thank you all for your attendance. Regardless of where you fall on these issues, your willingness to have a dialogue is a step in the right direction. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Fanot Gebra Michael, founder of the Eritrean Diaspora Network and member of the EBN leadership team. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to see all of you here, Eritreans, non-Eritreans, friends of Eritrea, friends of the Teamsters. Thank you so much for being here. Like Raven mentioned, I'm one of the founders of the Eritrean Diaspora Network, along with Robel Mescal and Segan Simon. Also in our leadership team is Nitzvah Irata, Naomi Demsas, and Michael Wazmania, who's not here with us tonight. And tonight's program is brought to you by the Civic Engagement Work Group under the Eritrean Diaspora Network, and our member Johanna Tesfa is also a very critical member of that team. So thank you so much for being here. And we also like to thank the International Brotherhood of Teamsters once again for providing us with this wonderful space and helping to facilitate this event tonight. We would not have done it without you. And thank you very much, Raven, for all of your hard work in putting this on and making this event excellent, sure to be excellent. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, the Eritrean Diaspora Network is a community organization based here in Washington, D.C. that was founded in late 2011, and its primary objective is to serve the needs of the Eritrean diaspora here in the DMV. We believe that building a strong Eritrean diaspora requires mobilizing our people around a nonpartisan community programming agenda. And we do so through three key programming pillars, like I mentioned before, the civic engagement, professional development, and support for recent arrivals. So that includes refugees and asylum seekers. The Civic Engagement Work Group, our primary objective is to build the civil capacity of the Eritrean community in the diaspora by engaging those of us here in our local community in various local, state, and national policy issues that impact us, and mobilizing Eritreans to hold major national and foreign policy institutions accountable for addressing our community's unique needs and establishing the Eritrean community as an influential political force in the diaspora. As part of the larger African diaspora, we are not immune to the costs of racialized policing. But as our national diaspora and other African diaspora communities, we have not done enough to contribute to the struggle for social change in this area. Now, as individuals, many of us may be taking part in different protests or participating in discussions on social media, but there's been little organized action at the community level, despite there being a number of different nationality and continental-based community groups. So in our view, we have a small sense of ownership in this larger discussion of the global movement for Black lives. So as an Eritrean diaspora organization, we are aware of the shortcomings in this area, and we're trying to rectify by being here tonight. Now, it's in this spirit that we've convened this wonderful panel of very diverse activists and social justice fighters from numerous different fields here tonight to discuss the global movement for Black lives. And really an intra-communal dialogue between those of us coming from several different community groups. So through this discussion tonight, we're hoping to point to the historical lessons from past struggles, which will teach us that when we unite and recognize our common fight, justice for all, we can stand up, fight back, and win. So in your brochures, you'll have full biographies of all the panelists, and Diana will be introducing them briefly as well, but I'd just like to introduce our moderator, Diana Forrester, who is a native Washingtonian and began organizing a little over 7 years ago. She's worked for organizations such as the United Food and Commercial Workers, Union Local 400, and Jobs with Justice. And while at UFCW, she worked on the Wake Up Walmart campaign and the Justice at Smithfield campaign. In 2007, she joined Teaching for Change as an education community organizer, where she supported parents of DC public school students in fighting for equality and equitable education and successfully fought against public school closures. After working for the union, Diana was the lead organizer for Organizing Neighborhood Equity, also known as 1DC, where she led the campaign demanding the right to live and work in DC. Diana is currently the lead political and community representative for UFCW Local 400, and she's also an ANC commissioner here in DC. She is a mom of 2 beautiful girls, Dylan and Brianna, and according to many, a future mayor of DC.
Yeah!
So ladies and gentlemen, welcome Diana.
I don't know where she is, but I'm taking her place this evening. Thank you. Actually, my name is Deanna Forster, but no one pronounces it right, not even my partner. That's why he calls me Dee. So you can call me Dee, but then also forgive me because I know that I'm going to mess people's names up tonight. But it's not out of disrespect, it's just not knowing. I graduated from public school. So with that being said, you can correct me and I won't be offended. I'm actually going to ask our panel to introduce themselves by first talking a little bit about who they are and what has brought them to engage in Black Lives Matters. And I'm going to start with my left.
Okay. My name is Rahel Tesfamariam, and I grew up in Washington, D.C. I always say that revolution is in my DNA. I really didn't have a choice. I came to the U.S. on a 6-month visa and was supposed to leave after being a flower girl at my sister's wedding. I told my family I didn't want to return to the land with chick on the ground, and that started my life here, and education was the thing that separated me from my brothers and sisters. And so I kind of lived my whole life fearing if I was going to be sent back home, and it wasn't until I was a senior at Stanford that I became a U.S. citizen. So that's kind of how I plant myself in movement work. I grew up hearing my brother talk about being a child soldier and holding AK-47s, and so I saw those images in my home. So I believe that I'm a child of revolution. I definitely believe that I'm a child of revolution. So that kind of is the reason that I've committed my whole entire life to this work. I don't really have a choice. My brothers and sisters have never been in the same room. My mother has never had all of her children in the same room. And that is a result of war and conflict and immigration. And so these are issues that are deeply embedded in who I am. And so I approach the struggle for Black lives because I believe that I'm fighting for my own humanity. I'm fighting for the humanity of my people, my family, that this is not some issue, or these aren't issues that I read about. They're ones that I feel I have no choice but to fight for. So to be more concrete, I have done community organizing work probably my whole life in some capacity, whether that was using the power of my voice. I'm an orator, I'm a writer, but also using it in the field of media, being a journalist here in DC, doing community organizing work in Anacostia. That's what I always did coming back from Stanford and Yale. I always worked in Anacostia. And I say that God planted a prayer in my heart for a global ministry, and that's what birthed Urban Cusp, which was, in my that was my form of a global ministry. I did not know that Trayvon Martin was going to be killed. I didn't know that Troy Davis would be executed right at the time that I launched Urban Cuts. And so I feel that it has now become somewhat of a movement medium where I can still do community organizing work, but I can do it on a national and global level.
Thank you.
I gotta come after that motion. My name is Yodi Tuoza, and first, thank you, EBN, for having me here this evening. It's a very important discussion that we need to have. I am a criminal defense attorney in Dallas, Texas, and we don't have a choice but to engage in this movement. It affects us all, and I don't care what anybody says. This movement is for everybody. And before I became a defense attorney, I was a prosecutor for 3 years. And when I broke out on my own and tried to run my own practice, my Brown situation happened. People associate this movement with just police brutality, but it goes further than that. We have racial inequities within the criminal justice system that people don't even realize. We have laws today that are race neutral on its face, race neutral, but hits our community so very hard. And what people see are iPhone recordings and dash cams of what is overt racism. But people need to be more aware of the racism that is neutral on its face. And people don't even understand that we suffer, our community suffers at every single level of the criminal process, from the point of contact with police officers, to bail, to plea bargaining, to convictions, to post-convictions. So I do what I do because I love it, but I have to as well. And I also started a series called The Conversation, and I work with juveniles in the juvenile department, and that's where it starts. Now with with police officers having to handle kids in school, you have a direct pipeline to prison for kids. And so we need to start at a very young age and start teaching these kids how to interact with law enforcement. So I have this conversation that a lot of these kids aren't having at home, might as well have it at school, and I'm going over their constitutional rights and being able to apply that in real world scenarios. It starts with our kids, so that's definitely what I do aside from my actual criminal practice. But yeah, so that's essentially what it is.
Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Flowers. My history is deeply entrenched in the American Civil Rights Movement. My grandfather came back from the Second World War, had served his country, and desperately wanted nothing more than higher education. So he applied to law school at the University of South Carolina in 1946, and you could imagine, being my grandfather, how that worked out. And then it was during the time that the NAACP had decided that they were going to try their hand at desegregating the South, and so Thurgood Marshall actually argued his case before the state of South Carolina, and operating under separate but equal, he had a choice that he could either take the school that was being offered to him in South Carolina State, where they would have to provide some sort of parity, or nothing at all. So he chose the law school, and he enrolled in 1946, and it stayed open at South Carolina State until 1965, and he was in the first class that graduated of 9 people. And so I don't ever remember a time, my grandparents were my child care providers. I'm very lucky for that. I didn't realize how lucky I was until I got older, but I don't ever remember a time in my life that I wasn't conscious. Like, there was never like a point where I had to be awakened, because I was always taught that you have to be better than your best to be considered equal. You have to give more than you have inside of you for society to even begin to treat you like the person that you actually are. And so the work comes naturally to me. I come from, besides my grandparents, my mother was the president of her teachers local my entire rearing years until actually about my mid-college years. So I knew about the union. I knew about how the union could make the difference in people's lives and the different aspects that come with an active union. Is social justice work, is racial justice work, and I found a natural path into this field. So I'm the director of organizing at UFCW Local 400. We're headquartered in Landover. You know us as your friendly giant Safeway, Macy's, Bloomingdale. We process your food at Tyson's Chicken, your lunch meat at Boar's Head. So you interact with our union members all the time, whether you know it or not, and I'm proud to be in a union that's really, really trying to think about how to be at the forefront, and how to be more inclusive, and how to take a step back and think about this moment in time and how we can actually lead. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thanks for everyone there for coming, and thanks for the organizers and asking us to sponsor it. It's really an honor for it. I'm the Deputy Director of the Department of Strategic Research and Campaigns here. We do strategic research and strategic campaigns, and I'm in charge of the strategic campaigns part of that. And basically what that department is the we have maybe 30,000 collective bargaining agreements that we represent 1.3 million workers in this country, mostly blue-collar workers, mostly in the transportation area, but not solely. And about 8,000 or 9,000 of those are up for negotiation every year. We have really no problems except for about 500 of those 8,000 or 9,000. And the 100 or so that are impossible to win, they give to our department to win. And that's what we do. And so we look at ourselves as as in charge of social justice campaigns for the Teamsters Union, because our approach to campaigning is to really identify the violations of social justice that workers bring the same violations they see outside of the workplace get intensified very often in the workplace. And almost every one of our campaigns is expressed in terms of a public campaign for social justice for workers. So we get involved in a lot of very interesting fights. Historically, we've done a lot on race, but I think with our staff, Ferguson just sort of like a lot of people here have said, and a lot of people in the country, it was like getting hit in the head for the club. Like, and we had to really relook at what we're doing, right? And especially among the white staff of the union, we had to look at ourselves and what racism really has become in America. And so we've studied, we've gone to Tiffany, I think you were one of the organizers of that townhouse meeting for the AFL. A couple of us went there, and that had a major impact on us. And so we've been looking at that, and we've really looked at our campaigns. And hopefully later I can share some of those campaigns with you and some of the things that we've done now. We've touched on mass incarceration, issues like that, and how racism sort of gets played out in a systemic manner in the workplace. So that's what our campaign, a lot of our campaigns are like that.
Hi, my name is Benjamin Duke-Brea. I'm with the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. And what we do is we're a collective that came together, an organization that came together around 2005, looking at immigration and bringing a racial justice analysis to immigration. Because what we found was that Black immigrants are erased in the immigration conversation. And so immigrants aren't seen as Black, and Black people aren't seen as immigrants. So we saw a big gap in that issue. What we were looking at in bringing a racial justice analysis was seeing that the political destiny of African Americans and Black immigrants are united, that we can organize through difference and come together to really to make serious wins around the ways in which structures of anti-Blackness are leveled against our communities in a number of different ways. And one of the things we talk about is mass criminalization. And when we say mass criminalization, we say that word often, but when we say criminalization is one of the definitions we work with is a way in which I can see you and treat you as a criminal, not by virtue of your actions, by virtue of your being. So who you are as you walk through the door. And so this is something that we've had help people grapple with and fight a lot of campaigns across the country. One of the campaigns that we worked with was called Safety Beyond Policing in New York City. And what we were focused on is bringing resources to our community to guarantee full employment for young people, housing, and education by stopping an effort to expand the NYPD, which was the largest police force in the country. And so these are some of the things that we did, and we realized this moment is critical for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons why it's critical is that as we look at the shared political destiny of African Americans and Black immigrants, remember that the Civil Rights Movement, 1968, the Black population was 1% foreign born. 2015, we're at this moment where nearly 16-17% of the Black workforce is Black immigrants. So we're in a totally new reality, because after 1968, a lot of the racial quotas around immigration were dismantled to allow immigrants to come to this country. And so it was the gains of the Civil Rights Movement that allowed Black immigrants to come into this country, but it's also those gains that are being pulled back. So you see that even as we roll up through the 90s, as a lot of the bills and the laws that created mass criminalization were also immigration bills. 3 Strikes was also talking about, now you don't get representation in immigrant court. So for many of you all, as you fight detention and deportation, you know exactly how difficult that is. And so we look at addressing anti-Blackness as a global phenomenon with local implications. And so we want to come together as we grapple with each other around what mass criminalization has done to our communities and how we can fight back in really powerful ways.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rama Kudemi, and I'm very honored to be here with all of you. I work for the U.S. Campaign to End the Israeli Occupation. We're a national coalition of hundreds of member groups working to end all U.S. support to Israel's oppression and denial of Palestinians and denial of their human rights. And so I come at this because when Mike Brown was killed last summer, there was a lot of thinking amongst a lot of us who are committed to Palestinian rights and working for Palestine in the United States, is how can we fight against issues of oppression and racism abroad and not do that when it's happening right in our own backyard. So a lot of Palestine solidarity activists in the U.S. Started to learn, or relearn, I'm going to say, because there's a long history of Black Palestinian solidarity in the U.S., but started to rethink what does it mean now in today's time to do that kind of work. And how do we ensure that when we're talking about settler colonialism in Israel and the impact on Palestinians, how we don't ignore the fact that the U.S. itself is a settler colonial state that was built on the genocide of the native population, on indigenous population, with Black slave labor. How when the U.S. talks about its shared values with Israel, and usually it says shared values as a good thing, but we know the shared values are militarism, police brutality, racism, anti-Muslim bigotry. How do we make those connections more apparent? And then how do we talk about the fact that Palestine activists in the U.S. are now facing attacks from the U.S. government, facing issues of repression and this is part of a greater issue of like the war on terror and how it specifically impacted Muslim Americans through issues of surveillance in the U.S. without thinking about, well, there's a long history of that in the United States, such as COINTELPRO and other efforts to shut down social justice activism. So that's kind of the way, as Palestine activism, I've been relating to Black Lives Matter in the past year.
Wow, I had no idea that I was going to be honored to facilitate the panel with such dynamic folks, and it's great just to hear the wealth of diversity and how folks have engaged and connected with this fight. I think that we all know, I remember the first time I heard Black Lives Matters, and I actually got offended by it. And I said, to who? Because since I've graduated from high school, growing up in DC, I've gone to at least 2 funerals of classmates, of my daughter's father, family members. I've spent years visiting my families in and out of jail. Then I've watched this city change over the past 15 years where people can no longer afford to live here. Where people that used to be able to sit on their front porch are now spending hours in their cars commuting. There's no longer a community. I remember even last night I was watching the news and they were talking about these great micro units. And they're building DC, and then once again I keep saying, for who? We did a displacement tour, we walked around the city where people were coming into the city and saying, now it's this great, new, gentrified, clean city, but for who? Preach. Preach. I remember doing a tour with a group of parents, half African American and half Latino, were being moved from Georgia Avenue, Bruce Monroe, and we walked around the neighborhood and we talked about the safety of the neighborhood, and the kids were being taken off Georgia Avenue and put behind on Water Street. And a mother from El Salvador told me, this is what we deserve, because in my country they don't want to see the poor children as they're commuting back and forth from school. So when I heard the phrase Black Lives Matter, and I still hear it, I say, to who? Who does it matter to? It matters to us, but does it really matter to the world? Does it really matter to the school system? Does it really matter to the employers? Because if it does, then things would not look the way they look, right? I think the exciting thing about this moment is people are going beyond being pissed and actually wanting something done about it. So when I used to have people hanging out in the corner and tell me about all the injustice and everything that was wrong in the world, last year we were marching down New York Avenue with them. People didn't know why they were marching, but they were tired of standing still. They were tired of being upset. They were tired of talking about everything that was wrong in the world. They felt connected to a movement. So I think that we all know that there was the civil rights movement, we have the Occupy movement, and now we have the Black Lives Matter movement. But what do you all think that some of the things that are different and unique about this time? How have you either personally connected or the work that you've done have been to move beyond this movement, not just where we are now? So.
This movement is clearly a continuum of what has been for centuries and for decades. Centuries in a sense that it obviously goes back to Nat Turner's slave rebellion. You know, it's not new in that sense that Black folks have always been fighting for their liberation by any means necessary. Always been fighting to dismantle white supremacy by any means necessary. The acts of violence that happened in slave rebellions were a way of saying Black Lives Matter. You know, so it's a continuum of all of that. It's also a continuum of the civil rights movement, of Brown v. Board of Education, of the Black Power movement, of anti-apartheid movement. You know, divestment from South Africa is a continuum of what's happening in Palestine. You know, all of this is a continuum where you have people across nations fighting for liberation. There are some unifying factors. One of them is this ever-present force, social, economic, psychological, that tries to declare white lives as most important, as superior, as valuable, and everything else is inferior. So the fight that we have is the constant resistance to that, right? Black Lives Matter is a hashtag, but it started as a hashtag, but it was really a continuum of, like I said, what we've always been saying. And so in that sense, for me, this is not a new struggle. I didn't start fighting when Trayvon was killed. Yeah. I didn't start fighting when Mike Brown was killed. You know, I feel that when I was noticing juvenile delinquency in my community, where young Black men were killing one another because they had internalized that self-hatred and didn't see themselves as valuable, that was a fight for Black Lives Matter. This has always been my fight. I think what's happened is that more people are understanding that there's no choice, that we've kind of been drafted into this army. And the army is a war in which we have to fight for our own lives. Because one of us can be murdered at any given moment, and there is the chance that our murderer will walk free. That's really the war that we're at. That if you kill my loved one, I want you to serve time. Because when Black people kill Black people, they go to jail. So when people talk about the fact that we don't value our own lives, if you think about it, the reason we fill up the prisons is that when we commit crimes, we go to jail. That's the difference. And so there has to be, well, the last thing I'll say is, another entry point that I've come into from this is also resistance to capitalism. That I think part of what we bought into is that the American dream is ours, that we can have it, is accessible to us, equally Black and white. I think part of what this is showing us is that that's not true. You can be on the most elite campuses in this country and still be racially profiled, still be beaten up and hurt, right? And so capitalism is not accessible to everyone. So part of what I've taken on is economic resistance, that we have to value more than what this country tells us is valuable. So not one dime is something that I have to talk about. It started in the aftermath of the Ferguson decision. The Ferguson decision happened November 24th of last year. Black Friday was that same week. And if you think about the fact that Tamir Rice, the 1-year anniversary of his killing is November 22nd. Jordan Davis was killed on Black Friday. The 1-year anniversary of the Ferguson non-indictment is November 24th. 1-year anniversary of Eric Garner's non-indictment is December 3rd. These aren't coincidences for me. To me, it says that part of how you build a memorial to these victims is that you honor them by placing value on their lives versus shopping and materialism. Why would we reward this country and this system when it doesn't even value our own lives?
And thank you, I appreciate that. And I just want to sharpen the question around, which you directly answered, was that there is this air, I mean, every time we turn the news on, despite our protest, someone else is being killed. And I feel like they're lifting up more to show us, no matter what we do, that people are still dying. That is my conspiracy theory, because I never seen us get so much media. But what is it that, there's this energy out there that can either be demoralizing or uplifting. So how are we engaging people in a fight that beyond what they're seeing now helps them see the injustice and push forward for something different and win and create the world that we want to see? I think you definitely gave that example, but as we're going around, if we can talk about the ways that we in our own work or in our own role are trying to help push back against some of this injustice. Tiffany, you wanted to answer?
I just think that ever since, I'm going to piggyback on a lot of things that you said because we're in total agreement, but ever since emancipation, the argument in this country has really been about whose right is it to take part in the American dream, right? Who does it belong to? And it seems as though in the history of our country and around the world that when Black and brown people and women and marginalized groups say that no, this actually is mine and I actually do have a right to this, we're met with violent force and resistance. And I think that the difference between other movements and even in just focusing on, juxtaposing the civil rights movement to the Black Lives Matter movement, I think it's bigger than this one ask. It's not just about getting into schools. It's not just about gaining acceptance and being given access. I think it's about every single demand. It's about the restorative justice. It's about healing. It's about making the demands on the system that we're not. I mean, look at these kids in Mizzou, these college students, they're occupying space. And they're naming not one thing. It's not like, oh, hire more Black teachers. It's like we are taking actual steps to dismantle the system. And I think that the Black Lives Matter movement really is about more than just demands, Deanna. I feel like it's really, really about comprehensive restorative justice, and we really want it all. We're not going to take a little bit here. We're not going to settle for a little bit over there. And we're sticking together, and we're showing up for each other, and we're fighting back, and we're locking arms. And it's the young people, it's the older people, it's people that had some hesitations about those Black Lives Matter kids in the beginning, but they see that we're moving mountains, right? Yeah. And we're doing it in a way that I feel like we're adapting different tools that our ancestors used to move the ball, but I think we're also a little more in your face. It's a little bit harder to deal with because we're sick of this shit. And we're not going to take it anymore. And we're making it very clear that we're not going to take it anymore. And we're taking I think we're just exploring so many avenues. And we're also far more inclusive because all trans lives matter. Yeah. All Black trans lives matter. All gay, all Black lives matter. If Bayard Rustin was alive today, he'd be arm in arm with us. We wouldn't be having him trying to hide who he is to make some of us comfortable. It's like the comfortability comes in freedom. And so we got our eye on one prize, and that's comprehensive freedom.
Yeah.